We are. All right, Rabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem, an incredible zechus to continue. What? Whoa. Oh, okay. Sorry. How about a please? How about a good morning? Something. Wow. Okay. A tough crowd. Okay. The microphone is coming. All right, I'll say, so good morning. I'll speak loud until we get to Moshe. Thank you. Good morning. A great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to begin another week of Bava Metzia. Well, it's actually not another week, a new week of Bava Metzia together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this month, with immense gratitude for the refuahs from Hashem, and the merit of a refuah for all of those in need, and the schus of our brave soldiers, and the merit Hashem, the return of each and every one of our hostages. The Schwartzbaum family, in memory of Rabbi Aaron Schwartzbaum, Aaron Yosef ben Meir, Zichron Livracha, and the Ziv, Levine, and Berman families, in memory of William Zev Shmuel ben Yisrael Zichron Livracha. Our week of learning sponsors, Steve Galaskov, in honor of the bris of his grandson, Nachum David ben Elio Baruch Halevi. Actually, Reb Steve is joining us on Zoom in Newark Airport. And Meretz Hashem on his, he's not just for fun. I'm saying he's not just going there for the day. He's on his way back from Eretz Yisrael, joining us, Baruch Hashem. And our Daf Yomi pastries today, sponsored by Matt and Diane Marks, in memory of the Art Side of Mass Father. Matt, did you hear that? Is that good? Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, good. Just want to make sure we're good. And I want to say, so again, Yashakach to all of our sponsors, all of the Neshama Shtav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and Emirat Hashem, all of our children and grandchildren should grow up in the ways of Yaakov Saba Kadisha. But say, Emirat Hashem, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today. Today, Baruch Hashem, is Daf Dalid. Daf Dalid, we are picking up on Gimel Amud Beis. We left off with, where did we leave off? 10 lines up? Amar Rabbi Meir. That one? Really? We didn't get past that? Asham, yeah, I knew that. Asham, right? Asham, I know carbon. Good. So I'll say, so remember again, we got the past. I don't think, you know what, when I actually finish like a whole blot of Gemara, don't rob me of that victory. Then I'll say, so remember again, just to orient ourselves a little bit. So if you remember again, we were speaking about the concept of Rabbi Chia, right? The entire Amud Beis was devoted to the statement of Rabbi Chia. Right? Let's just review for a moment. What did Rabbi Chia say? So Rabbi Chia said, Maran li biyadecha, v'Allah omer ein lecha biyadi klum, va'idim mi'idin oso sheyesh lo chamishim zuz. So as remember again, Rabbi Chia had this case where Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me 100 zuz. Shimon says, I owe you absolutely nothing. I owe you nothing. And then Eidim come along and say that no, Shimon, you owe Reuven 50 zuz. Okay, so that was the case. Rabbi Chia wanted to say that in that case, the halacha is that Shimon obviously has to pay the 50 zuz that the Eidim testified on, and then he has to take a shvuah on the rest. By shvuah on the rest. Why? So what was Rabbi Chia's lashon? Shelo tehei hoda'as piv gidola me'adas eidim mikal chomer. Because we'll say essentially what Rabbi Chia says is like this: because your own admission should be no stronger than testimony of witnesses. What was Rabbi Chia saying? Rabbi Chia saying was like this: as the concept of modim makes us. What's modim makes us? We're going to spend significant time on this. Modim makes us means, right? Reuven goes over to Shimon, says you owe me $1,000. Shimon says I only owe you 500. What's halacha modim makes us? You pay the amount that you admitted to, and then you have to take a shavua on the rest. Rabbi Chia essentially wants to say that witnesses, testimony should be no less than modeh b'mikzas. So in the same way, when there's a partial admission, that partial admission makes you swear on the rest. So too, when there's quote unquote partial testimony, right? So in this case over here, the witnesses are saying that Shimon owes half. So that partial testimony should require Shimon to have to swear on the rest. And again, Rabbi Chia says this is based on a kal v'chomer. So we spent time yesterday trying to figure out what this is. But now with the Gemara, now the process that the Gemara is going through is showing that 1 second. there's not really a connection. In other words, one's own personal admission versus testimony are not really the same things. They're fundamentally and halachically different. So we'll say, so that's what we're picking up over here. So the Gemara says, Elamalipiv shekin mechayvo asham. So we'll say, remember again, one could become chayiv and asham, right, through their own admission. Their own admission, to which the Gemara says, you're right, asham hainu karban. Elamalipiv shekem mechayv chomesh. So we'll say, so remember again, what's the halacha? Through your own admission, you could be chayiv chomesh. Remember we had this, we spent a lot of time Bava Kama in this case, right? I swear that I did not steal something, then I admit that in fact, I swore falsely. So what's the halacha? Chayiv three things, right? Number one, number two, chomesh. Number three, asham. Right. So again, through my own admission, I can be chayiv asham, but yet again, chomesh. But yet again, you're not chayiv chomesh to edim. Al halo kasha. Rabbi Chia Rabbi Meir svirle. So Rabbi Chia holds like Rabbi Meir. Ki echi de mechayiv le karba mekava chomer, mechayiv le chomesh mekava chomer. So ultimately, again, I will say, just like Rabbi Meir held that we saw in yesterday's daf, that Edim could ultimately make you chayiv in a carbon from a kava chomer, they certainly can make you chayiv in a chomesh from a kava chomer as well. Fine. Alamalapiv she'ena ba'achasha ba'azama tomar be'edim she'ena ba'achasha azama. So we'll say, so remember, all we're trying to do right now is poke a hole in Rabbi Chia's argument. That's all we're trying to write. Rabbi Chia's entire argument is predicated on the idea that your own personal admission should be no stronger than Eidim. And therefore, if personal admission of half of the claim generates a shavua on the rest of the claim, so too, again, testimony on part of the claim should also go ahead and generate a shavua for this claim. So I'll just point out over here that what we're doing over here in the Gemara is generally something you should try to avoid in the rest of life. Meaning what? So what the Gemara is doing over here is the Gemara is putting all of its efforts in deflating the argument of one party. In general, in life, there are two ways in which you could go ahead and solidify your argument, right? Either poke holes in everyone else's, or at the end of the day, build yourself up enough, right? Build yourself up enough that your arguments, your hashkafas, your ideals stand on their own. So you see this all the time in life, that people like to define themselves by what they're not. Right? So you see this even in the realm of hashkafa. I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. That's all fine. But instead of defining yourself by what you're not, there's something even better. Define yourself by what you are. Who are you? Don't create an identity that is established by deflating the ideals or the hashkafas of others, but rather go ahead and create an identity that is built on a positive definitional conception of who and what you are. Okay, that being said, sometimes if an idea is fundamentally flawed, you do have to take the time to deconstruct it. But again, that's more episodic, but the major goal is never define yourself by deflating others. Define yourself ultimately, again, by building a positive, strong sense of self and a strong identity. Okay, in any event, back to the Gemara. So we'll say, but yet, with all that, we are trying to disprove Rabbi Chia. The Gemara doesn't like this equating between piv, right, one owns personal admission, and eidos. On also again, the notebooks are here. I think we also do have more. And again, thank you to Rabbi Shmuel. I don't think you were here before, and I thanked you for the pen. People could keep those, right? Okay, and you're gonna resupply as often as needed. Okay, excellent, good. It's a pretty big commitment, by the way. It's a solid commitment. So right away, and okay, incredible. Thank you. Also looks very nice, mamish. Okay. Stickies, maybe also like sticky notes. Just people have. I'm just saying, make a little Office Depot over here. All right, so the Gemara goes right there. The Gemara says as follows: So we'll say. So remember again, the Gemara goes on. There's another way in which one's own admission is different than eidos. Eidos at the end there will say is subject to achasha, which means contradicting eidos, and hazama, edim zoamin. Such a concept like that doesn't apply to one's own admission. So bottom line, what the Gemara is pointing out over here is Rabbi Chia's entire argument is built, or his entire idea is built on equating one's own personal admission with eidos. We'll say at this point, what the Gemara has shown is that they're really dissimilar. You really can't compare them. So therefore, switching gears. years. Ela asya me'ed echad. So now watch this. In reality, what Rabbi Chia really means to say is he means to compare eid echad, the testimony of a single witness, ultimately with personal admission. Okay, so what's the argument? Ela asya me'ed echad, uma eid echad. Here we go. So we'll say, here's the argument. Uma eid echad shein mechayvo mamon mechayvo shvua. So we'll say eid echad, which never requires. Remember, we'll say a testimony of an eid echad, right? An eid echad comes and testifies about something. An eid echad can never make someone have to pay money. Yet, what could the testimony of an eid echad do? Eid echad could generate an obligation for shvua. For shvua, so the Gemara says, "Eidim shemechayvin also mammon, ein odin shemechayvin also shvua." So Rabbi say the Gemara now is reconstructing Rabbi Chia's argument. Rabbi Chia's argument is like this: an eid echad who can never make you liable in a financial sense, but yet an eid echad could generate an obligation for shvua. So then, certainly two witnesses who can go ahead and make you liable financially could certainly go ahead and make you obligated in a shvua. And Rabbi say, so again, let's just plug this back in. Same case. Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, I owe you nothing. Witnesses come along and say, Shimon, you owe Reuven $500. So now Rabbi Chia wants to suggest that based on the testimony of those witnesses, now Shimon has to take a shvua on the remaining 500. What's the kavachomer? Just like an eid echad can't make chayiv money, but can make you chayiv a shvua. So then again, halachas come, they can make you chayiv in money, and I'm sorry, who make you chayiv in money could certainly make you chayiv a shvua. Okay, so we'll say that's the new argument. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, good. We'll say here's the difference. By an eid echad, how does it work? On what? So we'll say. So just if you take a quick look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Mala eid echad. Before you turn the page, Rashi says, Kolomar hechi yalf shvua d'shnayim b'shvua de'eid echad. Mala eid echad shekin amasha ha'eid meid hu nishba la'achisho. We'll say in general the way it works with an eid echad is an eid echad causes you to take a shvua on the matter in which he is testifying. So Eid Echad comes and gives information, right? I contradict the Eid Echad. Ultimately, again, the testimony of the Eid Echad causes me to take a shvua on that very same piece of information that he is testifying on. Yeah, top of Dalid. Tomar be'edim sha'al mashu kafar hu nishba. So Rabbi say it's different, right? Because remember again in Rabbi Chia's case, what are the two edim making me take a shvua on? On the part that they're not testifying on. Remember again, I was saying in Rabbi Chia's case, what's happening? Right? One more time. Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, I owe you nothing. Witnesses show up and say that Shimon, you owe Reuven $500. Now Rabbi Chia wants to suggest that therefore their testimony on the first 500 should trigger a shavua on the second 500. So I both say, here's what's interesting. Now remember, are the first set of witnesses, are the Eidim, are they saying anything about the second 500? Nothing. Their testimony is totally about the first 500. Yet Rabbi Chia wants to make a jump to say that just like an Eid Echad who can't obligate you in money, obligates you in Shavua, then certainly two witnesses who obligate you in money, obligate you in Shavua. But the Gemara says it's not a good comparison. An Eid Echad obligates you on Shavua on the very matter that the Eid is testifying. Over here, in this case, you want the testimony of the two Eidim to generate the shvuah on something they're not testifying about. In other words, we'll say, if you go over to those two Eidim and you say, what about the second 500? What are those Eidim going to say to you? What are they going to say to you? I don't know. We don't know anything about the second 500. We only know about what we testified. We testified the first 500. That's all we know about. To which the Gemara says, Allah Amra Papa. Gilgul Shvua De'ed Echad. So is very interesting. So Papa comes along and says, we're going to go ahead and bring it up as a matter of Gilgul Shvua from Eid Echad. What does this mean? Mali Gilgul Shvua De'ed Echad, Shekein Shvua Goreret Shvua, Tomar Be'edim Demamon Kamechayvi. But say, take a quick look at Rashi. Megilgul Shvua De'ed Echad, in this Chayiv Shvua Ayidei Eid Echad, Kidar Minon, V'haisa Alav Tain Acher Shlo Haisa Mutalas Alav Shvua, Megalgilin Osa Im Shvua Zos, V'nishpa Al Shnehem. The Gilgul Shvua Daraisa, the Afina B'Kiddushin, Mevar. So let's listen to this. There's a concept, we've seen this before. Gilgul Shvua. Gilgul Shvua means like this. Sometimes there's a particular matter of dispute over which we would like a person to take an oath, but we can't generate the halachic obligation for an oath. Gilgul Shavua says that essentially once you're already swearing about something, we can make that oath devolve upon other things that would have in and of themselves never generated an obligation for Shavua. It's essentially kind of like, once we have you up there, once you're taking the Shavua, we'll extend that Shavua upon anything. Now, it's not anything, it's only certain matters, so watch this. The Gemara says, therefore, like this, Mali Gilgul Shavua de Eid Echad Shekin Shavua Gorah Shavua, Shavua says, by an Eid Echad, so by Echad, here's what's interesting. So just like an Eid Echad could generate an obligation for Shavua, once you're swearing about that particular matter, we could extend that Shavua over other things as well. Tomar be'edim b'mamon kamachayvi. So we'll say, certainly again, by edim, who obligate you in mammon, certainly they can obligate you in other forms of shua as well. To which the Gemara says, piv yochiach. So we can bring a raya from piv. Mala piv shekein eina b'chasha. You can't compare that. You can't compare one's own admission. Why, Rabbi Osai? Because one's own admission is not subject to achasha. Eidechad yochiach sheyeshna b'achasha machayva b'shvua. So Eidechad will prove the point, because Eidechad is subject to achasha and yet obligates you in shua. Mala Eidechad shekein amashemeid hu nishpa. Eidechad is different, because Eid Echad generates a shvua on the matter in which he's testifying. But by Eidim in general, again, I will say by Rabbi Chia's case, you want the litigant to swear on the matter that the Eidim are not testifying about. So I will say we're stuck in a bit of a circle over here. To which the Gemara says, you're right. The Chazra din lo re'izeh k're'izeh, but lo re'izeh k're'izeh. So I will say all of these things are not really fully comparable. So I will say in general, here's what's interesting. In the Gemara, when you have a number of things that are not fully comparable, but at the end of the day do have kind of like a common denominator, what we do is like this. We say, Zat Tzad Hashavah Shabahan. So we'll say, Tzad Hashavah is like a common denominator. What's the common denominator here? Sha'al Yedei Taina Ukfira Hein Ba'in V'nishba. We'll say the common denominator here is, there's a claim, and then there's a denial. So where there's a claim and then a denial, that generates shvua. Af ani avi edim. So to Rabbi I'll bring the case of edim. Back to Rabbi Chia's case. Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, I don't owe you anything. Witnesses come along and say, you owe 500. Rabbi Chia wants to suggest that should generate Shimon's obligation to swear on the remaining 500. Rabbi say, why? There's a taina, there's a claim, there's a kfira, there's a denial, and therefore Rabbi say the common denominator between piv, Eid Echad, and now Shnei Eidim is that ultimately, again, that should generate a Shavua on the rest. So we'll say, so pause here for just a second. So therefore we'll say, what the Gemara wants to suggest is like this. We have a strong common denominator between Eid Echad and between Modeh B'Miktzas, your own partial admission, partial denial. What's the common denominator? There's a claim, there's a denial, and ultimately, again, that results in a shvua on the part that you're denying. The Gemara says, let's take that same common denominator and apply it to Rabbi Chia's case. Because Rabbi Chia's case, there's a claim. What's the claim? Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. There's a denial. What's the denial? Shimon says, I owe you 0. Then what happens? Witnesses come and say, Shimon, you owe 500. Okay, so now that should generate an obligation to swear on the remaining 500. That's it. To which the Gemara says, one second, I will say now, the truth is maybe the common denominator between Hodas Asmo, right, admission, and Eid Echad is Lo Hochsa Kafran. See, I will say maybe the common denominator is that at the end of the day, the guy is not established to be a liar. Tomar be'edim shein chusa kafran. So I will say, in the case of the edim, Rabbi Chia's case, right? Reuven says, you owe me 1,000. Shimon says, I owe you nothing. Witnesses show up and say that Shimon owes Reuven 500. I will say, essentially, Shimon has been established as a liar. Right, as a liar. Why? Because there are witnesses that say that he owes 500. So I'll say, so that's different than the other two cases of Eid Echad, or admission, or Modu Mixas. It's fascinating. So I'll say, but even when witnesses show up, is Shimon still established as a liar? After all, this is actually an incredible halacha from Rav Idi bar Avan Rav Chisda. Hakofer b'milva kasher le'edus b'bikadon pas le'edus. So I will say this is actually fascinating. If if Reuben goes over to Shimon, and Reuben says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. I lent you money, you owe me money. And Shimon says, I don't owe you anything. And witnesses come along and testify. Rabbi says, keep it a simple case. Witnesses come along and say, Shimon is chayav for the full $1,000. So you'd say, what's Shimon's status in halacha? What's his status? What's his status? Right? He's a liar. Right? He's a liar. Right? He lied. So we'll say, what are the halachic ramifications of being a liar? Right? Certainly can't be acceptable as a witness or things like that. So the Gemara says, if you are caught lying, total denial about a loan that you're obligated on, you're not established as a kafran. You're not established as a liar. We'll say, now why is that? It's because that's what we saw in yesterday's daf. So we'll say, people deny loans. But why do people deny loans? Not because they don't plan on paying it back. Rather, why? They're trying to buy themselves time. Trying to buy themselves time. Ishtamuti kamishtametli. That was Lashon in the Gemara. Right? I'm going to pay back. I don't have the money now. I don't have the money now. So instead of saying I don't have the money now, which doesn't make me look very good, I'd rather just say I don't know. But I don't really mean, so I'll say it's fascinating. This is built into the halacha. Built into the halacha that when you fully deny a loan, at the end of the day, you're not what we call huchsak kafra. Now again, I don't know that you should do business with such a person like this, right? It might not be the best idea, but lamaisa, from a halachic perspective, we would be able to still accept testimony from a person like this, as opposed to, we'll say, a pikadon, as opposed to a deposit, right? If Reuven deposited his watch, right, his watch with Shimon, and he claims the deposit, he says, gave back my Rolex, right? And what happens? And Shimon says, Rolex, I never had it, you never deposited Rolex. So we'll say, and then witnesses come along and say, you did have the Rolex, he is a kafir. And we'll say, in that case, now he is an established liar. Why? We'll say, because there's a fundamental difference between pikadon and loan, right? Milva lahotsan nitna. A loan is made to be used. A pikadon is not made to be used. It's made to be guarded. It's made to be washed. So we'll say, if you lie about a pikadon, then you are a liar. Ela parachachi. Rather, the Gemara says, ask the following question. Ask the following question. We'll say maybe the common denominator between admission, what we call hoda'as atzma, modeh b'miktzas, and eid echad, is that they're not subject to hazama. Well, so right, hazama is the process of reciprocity by eidim, right? Hazama. So the Gemara says, Torah be'edim sheshna b'Torah hazama. Witnesses, yet again, shtei eidim are subject to hazama. The Gemara says, Halo kasher Rabbi Chia Torah hazama lo parach. Rabbi Chia is not bringing up hazama. He's not bringing up hazama. Ela de ka'amar v'tanatuna midami. So I'll say, furthermore, again, we wanted to suggest that our case in the Mishnah is like the case of Rabbi Chia, to which the Gemara says, how can you really compare the two cases? At the end of the day, Hasam lamalva islay sahadi, lelova leslay sahadi, delo masikle velo midi. Di havele sadi lelova, delo masikle velo midi, lo by Rabbi Chia l'shtabuye. I will say, how can you compare the case of Rabbi Chia to the case of our Mishnah? Because at the end of the day, in the case of our Mishnah, in the case of the Rabbi Chia, the lender has witnesses, the borrower has no witnesses, right? Because obviously, if the borrower had no witnesses, if the borrower had witnesses, he would never come to take a shvuah. In other words, you'll say to yourself, how does a borrower have witnesses that he didn't borrow money? So you could claim very easily, you could claim again, that essentially if the lender ultimately is going ahead and saying that halacha l'maisa, if the lender is saying that halacha l'maisa, I lent you money on a certain date, and let's say again the borrower has a different claim that he was away on that day, so obviously we're talking about a case where the lender doesn't have witnesses. If the lender did have witnesses, he wouldn't be in this whole shavua situation to begin with. To which the Gemara says, Hacha, I will say in the case of our Mishnah, there are witnesses. How are there witnesses? Ki hechi da'anan sahadi bahai, anan sahadi bahai, ba'afilu hachi mishtabai. I will say in the case of our Mishnah, essentially there is testimony. I will say, what's the testimony? The testimony is that each party is holding on to their side of the talus. Right? Holding on to the side of the talus is effectively testimony that says, you own this part and you own this part. And yet, I will say, even with all of that testimony, both parties are still obligated to go ahead and to go ahead and swear. Both say, take a quick look at Rashi, 3 lines down on the wide lines. Anan Sahadi Bahai, Lahai Rashi says, Dechatzia Shalo, Velama Hitzichua Chacham Shvua, Shmamina Taima Lab Mishum Mode Mixas Atanu Krebichia, Ve'ena Shvua Da'oraisa, Ela Takanas Chacham Shalei Kol Echa Ve'echa. So we'll say, so now watch this, let's just pause here for just a second. So we'll say, here's what we have, right? Here's what we have. We have Rabbi Chia's statement, right? And so we've kind of like unraveled that a little bit and gotten to a good place with that, right? Rabbi Chia ultimately is telling us, one more time, Reuven lends $1,000 to Shimon. Comes to Shimon, give back my money. Shimon says, I owe you nothing. Witnesses come along and say you owe 500. Rabbi Chia wants to say that based on the testimony of the witnesses that owe 500, that triggers a shvuah for the remaining 500. For the remaining 500, and Rabbi Chia says because this case of Eidos should be no less strong than the case of Hodas Atzmo, than the case ultimately again of admission, or at least of partial admission. Mod de b'miktzas. Just like Mod de b'miktzas generates an obligation for Shvuah, so too Eidos should generate an obligation for Shvuah. So we've gone through a whole thing about what is Rabbi Chia saying. So it sounds like at the end of Rabbi Chia is really saying is, he's really comparing it to Eid Echad, or Tzara Shava. Okay, however we resolve that. Now we're transitioning to the next piece, which says, and Rabbi Chia brings a raya from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah supports this same concept. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand, the Gemara does not go ahead and really support this concept, right? Because Rabbi Chia's case is only where there's eidos for the lender, but no eidos for the borrower, right? Our case of the Mishnah Shnai Mochsin is essentially, there's eidos for both. There's eidos, right? Remember again, we'll say, what's the case of our Mishnah? Shnai Mochsin Betalis. Reuven and Shimon are both holding on to the cloak. Ze Omer Ani Mitzaseh V'Kol Ze Smastalach. We'll say, Yachloku. We'll say, how do we view that case? We view that case essentially as both Reuven and Shimon having eidos. They both have testimony. We view it as if, now we'll say, what's the testimony? The testimony is by dint to the fact that they're both holding on to the talis. So when I see Reuven holding on to the talis, there's eidos that it's his. Shimon's holding on to the talis, there's eidos that there's his. And we'll say, and yet what's talacha? So what's talacha in the Mishnah? What's talacha in the Mishnah? Yachloku. But remember, Yachloku not without what? Not without a shvuah. Not without a shvuah. So Rabbi say, in reality, that's different than Rabbi Chia's case, right? Because again, in Rabbi Chia's case, if the borrower had eidos, then there would be no shvuah, right? The only reason there is a shvuah is because the lender has partial testimony and the borrower has no testimony. In our case, both have testimony, yet both swear, which indicates to us that our Mishnah is nothing like Rabbi Chia's case. Ella, so we'll say, watch this, here we go. Ella, ki itmar v'tanatuna, you're right. When Rabbi Chia said that the Mishnah supports his claim, he wasn't talking about our Mishnah. He was talking about a different Mishnah. Rabbi say, get ready for this. Don't Rabbi Chia. Rabbi say, get ready. Get ready. Rabbi say, if you need to restock on the pastries, Brother Matchka, thank you very much again for that. Rabbi say, so again, I'm sorry? Say again? No, I'm good. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ella ki itmar v'tanat. Get ready for this. Rather, when the Gemara says that Rabbi Chia brings us support from our Mishnah, he's talking about another Mishnah. Get ready. The Rabbi Chia, it's either Rabbi Chia itmar. The Rabbi Chia. Here we go. Get ready. Reuven says to Shimon, "You owe me $1,000." V'hala omer ein lecha biyadi elanun, and Shimon says, "I only have 500." V'helech. I will say helech. We'll say. Halech, just to give you, this is a major sugya, halech. So I'll say, so my son-in-law now in BMG, they just finished the sugya of halech. I think they spent about 3 months on it. This is a major sugya in Shas. We're going to spend 4 minutes, right? But again, because we're only going to go with Rashi's idea of halech. But I feel compelled. Like you could write this down in your notebook. major Shas Sugya here that Shmuel Silber totally glossed over, right? So you can keep a running list of those, right? So again, I feel compelled to point it out to you over here. This is a major sugya, but again, we're just going to go kind of quickly with the approach of Rashi in this. So we'll say, so here we go. So here's the case. Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, I only owe you 500 vehelech. Now both say, now vehelech means, literally translated, how do you translate vehelech? And take it. Or here it is, it's yours. It's yours. Now look at Rashi, vehelech. Rashi says, Lo hotsesim vehein shalach b'chol makom shehein. Okay, so Rashi says like this. Rashi says, the way that this case is set up is as follows. In general, we have a concept of when you lend money to someone, milvo lahotsan nitna, right? Essentially, you give a loan to someone, that money becomes the property of the borrower. Money of the property of the borrower. And it really becomes his money totally during the entire duration of the loan. The case of Halach, according to Rashi, it was where the borrower says to the lender, I never even used the money. The money that you gave me, the actual money that you gave me, is still extant. Essentially, it never left your reshus. It's yours. It's yours. Wherever the money is, it's yours. That's halach. I never even used it. I never used it. And it's Lashon of Rashi. Lo tzeisim, I never used the money. Vehein shalcha b'chol makom shehein. And therefore, the money literally still, it belongs to you. It's in your domain. You lender, wherever the money might be. So we'll say. So now watch this case. So one more time. So Reuven goes over to Shimon. Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, first of all, I only owe you 500. That's number one. And number two, I never even used the money. Halach, right? It's yours. It's yours, right? The money is back in your reshus. I never even touched. I never even took it. Okay. So the Gemara says, "Vehelech." What's the halacha? Chayiv. Ultimately, again, Rashi says chayiv lishava al ashar. So Rabbi say ultimately in this case, Shimon is going to be obligated to swear the remaining 500. V'lo amrinan. So Rabbi say we don't say v'lo amrinan hanin dekamodile begavayu hol ve'isnu be'inayu kiman dinakit le demand dinakit lu dami el kishar mod demixas. Okay, this is so exciting. So Rabbi say now watch this. At first glance, you see this case, you're like, okay, this is a modeh b'miktzas case, right? So we'll say, here's the novelty. You might have thought that because Shimon the borrower is saying halach, and he's saying essentially like, I never even utilized the loan money, maybe it's not modeh b'miktzas. Maybe it's not modeh b'miktzas. In other words, maybe we'll say what he's saying is, here's the loan, it's complete admission, and that this is not a case of modeh b'miktzas. What's modeh b'miktzas? Modeh b'miktzas is to begin with, I utilized the loan, we have a dispute about the amount of the loan. In this case over here, one might have thought that since the actual loan money itself is extant, that this is a different kind of case, and it's not modeh b'miktzas. Kamash Malan, the Gemara says, Rabbi Chia says, no, even though the borrower is saying, halach, here's the money, I never even used it, it's still called modeh b'miktzas. It's as if you admitted 500, denied the other 500, and therefore you have to swear on the remaining 500 as well. My timer, what's the reason? Halach nami ki modeh b'miktzas dami. Because Rabbi Chia says, halach, it's like a regular case of modeh b'miktzas. Vitana tuna. So I was saying, okay, so that's Rabbi Chia's statement. Vitana tuna. Furthermore, again, our Mishnah supports this idea. How so? Shnaim ochsim betalis. Right? We'll say so again. Our Mishnah supports that same idea. I vaha hacha kevan detafis. Anan Saadi Demai Detafis, Heilechu, Vekatani Yeshava. So we'll say, now watch this. So Rabbi wants to suggest our Mishnah supports this very idea. Why? Because we'll say, listen to this. When you have two people holding the talis, the Gemara wants to suggest maybe when Reuven's holding his part, he's claiming his part, and he essentially says Halech to the part that Shimon's holding. And Shimon holds his part, and he says Halech to the part that Reuven's holding, and yet what? They still have to take a shvuah. So Rabbi Chia is using our Mishnah to back up his position on Halech. So Rabbi say absolutely incredible. Take a quick look at Rashi. V'tana tuna kasagadaitcha. Rashi says the kasagadaitcha Rabbi Chia taima demasisi mishum da'anan saadi demai detafis dilehu v'avi kimana li biyadecha v'ala omer ein lecha biyadi klum v'idem meidin also sheyesh lo chamishim v'chi idach Rabbi Chia demechayev l'shvua da'araisa. So Rabbi says the Gemara is suggesting over here, once just to Rabbi Chia, our Mishnah should be just like a case of Halech. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Rav Shesha says, Halech Potter. Rav Shesha says no. Rabbi say in this case over here, going back to the case of Halech itself, right? Reuven lends Shimon $1,000. Reuven comes back to Shimon, give back my money. Shimon says, here's 500 Halech. I only borrowed 500, and the 500 that I borrowed, it's extant. It's there. Take it. It's yours. It's yours. So ultimately, again, Rav Shesha says Shimon is pater. He's pater from any subsequent shvua. Why? He says Halech pater. My taima kevan da amra le Halech hani zuzi di kamodi begavayu kiman dinakit le malvadami binach chamishim ha lo modi. Because what I say is fascinating. Essentially, what Rav Shesha says is like this: in the case of Halech, we view as if now this is a self-contained admission, and therefore, because the money is extant, therefore the lender acquires it wherever it is, and therefore, again, the additional 500 is a separate claim. It's a separate claim, and therefore this is not a modi b'miktsas. Be'ina chamishim ha lo modi. With the additional 500, additional 50, ultimately again Shimon is not admitting anything. Hilchach leka hodas miktsas atayna. Therefore, there's no modi b'miktsas. So if Rabbi say again, just what was happening over here. So just to be clear, there's kind of two things happening. Rabbi Chia is bringing up the case of Halech, and Rabbi Chia holds that Halech is like modi b'miktsas, and therefore you're going to be chayiv shvu on the remaining 500. And he brings a raya to that from our Mishnah. He treats our Mishnah almost like a case of Halech. Case of Halech. Then he brings up the position of Rav Shesha. Rav Shesha says, no. Halech is not modi b'miktsas. Not modi b'miktsas at all. In fact, in a case of Halech, where halacha l'maisa, the original money is extant, the lender acquires that money wherever it is, and there's no modi b'miktsas. There's no partial admission. Essentially, what Rav Shesha says is like this: when the original loan money is still in existence, that's a different kind of case. Just a different kind of case. That's Halech, no modi b'miktsas, and of course, no comparison to our Mishnah. Incredible. All Rav Sheshas, Kashem Masnisin. What would Rav Sheshas do with the Mishnah? Rav Sheshas Masnisin Takanas Chachamimhu. So Rav Sheshas will say, no. The shvu of our Mishnah, Rabosai, is a Takanas Chachamim. Right? We saw this on the top of Daf Gimel. Right? In yesterday's Daf. Rabosai, remember again, the Pasha Pshat. How do you understand the shvu in our Mishnah? The shvu in our Mishnah is a rabbinic enactment. For what purpose? That people shouldn't go around grabbing each other's stuff saying, it belongs to me. See, I remember again, can you imagine a world in which you can go over to someone's cloak, grab it and say, ani mitzaseh v'kula shali. And I'll say, and what do you get? And what does the halacha say? Okay, right, and we just split it. We need that shvua, because otherwise, again, it's complete chaos. The idach, Rabbi Chia will say, in Takanas Chachamim he. So we'll say Rabbi Chia will agree. Yes, I also agree that the Shur Mishnah is Takanas Chachamim. However, Umiyu I Amrit Bishlam Midoraisa Halech Chayiv. So Rabbi Chia will say like this: if you say that Midoraisa Halech is chayiv in a shvua like modi b'miktsas, then midiktani rabbanan shvua ke'in daraisa. Then I will say it makes sense that the rabbis instituted the Mishnah, the shvua in our Mishnah, because our Mishnah resembles a halach case. And I will say in general, rabbinic shvuos are modeled after biblical shvuos. So you have a biblical shvua of halach, and then the shvua of our Mishnah is modeled after that biblical shvua. The Gemara says, however, but if you say that midaraisa halech is pater, like Rabbi Chia wants us, like Rav Sheshas wants to suggest, then metakni rabbanan shvua delaisi de kavasa midaraisa. Then ultimately, again, the rabbi is going to enact a shvua that does not have a comparable model midaraisa. So may say where is the kasha slaim amud will say amud beis slaim dinarim. Rabbi says it's a very interesting case. Let's say Ruvain lends Shimon money. He lends Shimon money. There's only one problem. I'll say one minor detail, which is they did not write the amount in the document. So all it says is that Ruvain lent Slaim to Shimon. Yeah, that's what he wrote. So the Gemara says, Malva Omer Chamesh Velova Omer Shalosh. So the lender says, I lent you 5 slaim, and the borrower says, I only borrowed 3. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Hoil v'hodem mixas atani yeshama. It's modem mixas. Modem mixas. The claim is for 5. The claim is for 5. The admission is for 3. This is modem mixas. So what's the halacha modem mixas? So again, you pay what you pay, what you admitted to, and what? You swear on the rest. Swear on the rest. Rabbi Akiva says no. Eino ela kimeshiv aveda upater. Rabbi Akiva says no. This is not a case of mod b'mixas. Rather, what is this? This is a case of returning stolen property. What does that mean? Or returning lost property. So Rabbi Akiva will say this. Come on. Based on the document, what is Ruvain obligated to? I'm sorry, what is Shimon? Right? Ruvain's the lender, Shimon is the borrower, right? So remember, what does the document say? The document says that Ruvain lent Slaim to Shimon. Now Ruvain comes along and says, I owe you 5. I owe you 5, right? I'm sorry. Ruvain comes along and says, you owe me 5. Shimon comes along and says, I owe you 3. So Rabbi Akiva, so we'll say, now what's the halacha? So Rabbi Shmuel says, motive mixas, partial admission. So pay what you admitted to, swear on the rest. Rabbi Akiva says, no. Shimon doesn't have to swear on anything. Why? Because both in reality, he's like returning lost property. What does that mean? It will say, based on the document itself, what is Shimon going to be obligated to pay? 2, right? Because 2 is the minimum definition, ultimately, of slaim. Now he's admitting that he owes 3. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. In other words, he doesn't have to admit to anything above and beyond 2. The fact that he's already admitting to 3, Gemara calls that's like returning lost property. Okay, Katani Miyasavos, so what do you see from here? Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer, Hoil Bahoda Mixas Atani Yeshava. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, this is a case of Moda B'Mixas. Taima Da'amar Shalosh. Now the reason he has to go ahead and swear on the rest is because he said 3. Now I will say, here's what's interesting. Ha'amar Shtayim Pater. Now I will say, interestingly enough, according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, sounds like the reason it's Moda B'Mixas is because he admitted 3. Had he admitted 2, it sounds like he wouldn't have to swear. I v'hashtar dikamodi bei heilechu. Now, I will say this shtar almost could be compared to a case of heilech. Why is it a case of heilech? Because I will say at the end of the day, you have a shtar that does say that he owes 2. And that shtar is extant. That shtar is there. Ushmamina heilech pater. So you see, from the according to Shimon Elazar, had he admitted 2, he wouldn't have to swear on the rest. The only reason he has to swear because he admitted 3, then it becomes modeh b'mikzas. But had it been 2, he wouldn't swear because 2 is backed up by the shtar. That's like halach, and from here you see that halach is pater and shavua. All right, well, say an interesting argument. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, in reality, according to Shimon Elazar, even had he admitted 2, ultimately he would be chayiv." So why did we bring up a case of 3? I will say the only reason we brought up the case of 3 is to exclude the position of Rabbi Akiva, right? Rabbi Akiva says that when you admit 3, it's like returning lost property, and of course you're not chayiv in any kind of shua for the rest. So Rabbi Shimon Elazar brings up the case of 3 in order to go ahead and refute the position of Rabbi Akiva. Kamash Malon, the mode of mixas hataina havi v'chayiv. So for Kamash Malon, Rabbi Shimon Elazar says no, this is the case of mode of mixas and you're chayiv. So the Gemara says okay, ihachi Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer howil v'holda mixas atani yeshava af ze yeshava mibayile. So we'll say if that's the case, Rabbi Shimon Elazar shouldn't say because he was mode of mixas you're chayiv in a shvu. It should say even in this case you have to swear. Elali olam shtayim pater. So we'll say rather in reality what you have to say is like this. In reality, had Ruvain just admitted, had Shimon just admitted, I'm chayiv to slaim, case closed, right? You can't generate a shavua for the rest, because at the end of the day, that's what the document supports. V'heilech chayiv. And in reality, heilech would generally be chayiv shavua. So why is this case different? V'shayni hacha, the kamisai l'shtara. So I will say, here's what's interesting. even if normally you would say that Halach is chayav in a shvua, because Halach is like mod b'miktzas, this case is different. I will say, why is this case different? Because if Ruvain admits to 2 slaim, and you have a shtar that says that Ruvain lent slaim to Shimon, there's no claim. There's no claim. Rabbi says the minimum definition of slime is 2. Shimon is admitting to 2. The shtar backs up that admission. Case closed. Case closed. Sigmar says, Inami, Mishum Dahavile shtar, Shibud Karkos. Further again, let's say in general, whenever you have a shtar, right, the loan document goes ahead and creates a lien on real property. And I will say generally we don't lie regarding any denial of a claim that involves real property. So we'll say fine, so others reframe this entire conversation in a different way, basing it on the Sefer. We'll say, what did the Sefer say? Rabbi Kiva says, so we'll say, going back to the case we saw before, right? This was the case we mentioned before, right? Ruvain goes ahead and lends money to Shimon. They have a document that says Ruvain lent slaim to Shimon. Ruvain comes along and says, you owe me 5 slaim. Shimon says, I owe you 3. So here's machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, Mod b'miktzas, paid the 3, swear on the 2 remaining ones. Rabbi Kiva says, absolutely not. All Ruvain was on the hook for to begin with was what? 2, because that's what's backed up by the shtar. The fact that he says 3, that's like returning lost property. You can't hold him accountable for anything else. So we'll say, now watch this. Rabbi Akiva says when he admits 3, it's like returning lost property, and he's pater on the rest. Time of Da'amar Shalosh. Now the reason, according to Rabbi Akiva, why he's pater on the rest is because he admitted to 3. I was going to say, what the Gemara is intrigued by over here is, why did you set this up as a case of 3? Hashtayim chayiv. It sounds like if he only admitted 2, he would be chayiv a shavua on the rest, like mod b'miktzas. To which the Gemara says, "Hashtar kaven the kamodi bekehelech dami." And I will say, since he has the shtar, and everyone's admitting to the existence of the shtar, this should be like a case of helech. And what do you see from here? Shmamina helech chayiv. Going back to the machlokes before, it is clear that helech ultimately again is going to be chayiv, because helech is treated like a case of motab b'miktzas. To which the Gemara says, "Lo liolam emelach hashtayim nami pater." In reality, I would say that what? Even in a case where he admits to slaim, he's still pater. Sai b'hadik tani shalosh. So why does it bring up a case of 3? La fukim of Shimon Elazar dar mod b'miktzas atayna chayiv. So I will say this comes to exclude Rav Shimon Elazar, because Rav Shimon Elazar says when he admits 3, that becomes a case of mod b'miktzas. Pay what you said you're liable to, and swear on the rest. Kamash malan demeshiv aveda havi upater. Say if Rabbi said the Gemara is coming along, Rabbi Akiva is coming along to say no. This is a case of meshiv aveda. This is a case of like returning lost property, and you are pater. You don't have to swear on anything. Hachan nami mistabra. Rabbi said this seems to be clear. Di'i sakadait chashtayim chayiv b'shalosh hechi pater. Because Rabbi said at the end of the day, you would say that if he swore 2, if he admitted 2, then he'd be chayiv a shvua on the rest. Then how could you say that he'd be pater if he claimed 3? A person could easily exploit that. They could say savar. So I'll say if I admit that I owe 2, that's going to generate the shvua. So I have a better idea. I'll just admit that I owe 3. It'll be like returning lost property. And I'll be exempt. Rather, Rabbi say what you have to say is that halach lamaisa, even though they went ahead and they quoted it in a case of 3, lamaisa again. Even in a case of 2, Rabbi Akiva would still say ultimately again that you are pater on the shvua. Okay, so Gemara says Ela kasha Rabbi Chia. I will say, what do you do with Rabbi Chia? Right, Rabbi Chia again. Rabbi Chia who said that helech you're chayiv in a shvua. Shiny hasan the kamisai lishtara. I will say this case is different. Why? Because in this case again the borrower has a shtar that backs up his claim. Remember again, the whole problem with this case is all you have in the shtar is that what? That Ruvain lent Shimon slaim. Slaim, in Naimushum Dahavili Shtar Shibud Karkos. Furthermore, again, I will say, furthermore, you have a shtar. Shtar creates a lien on real property. And in general, we don't create the shvua situation or any case where there is a denial of real property. So I will say, so let's regroup a little bit over here because this was a jam-packed daf. A lot of stuff unfolding over here. So I will say, So remember again, here are the takeaways. Here are the takeaways so far from today's daf. So first again, I will say, we kind of brought, not really, but kind of brought like a little bit of closure on Rabbi Chia's statement. Again, remember, what was Rabbi Chia's statement? Rabbi Chia was that you have a case ultimately of, right, Reuven lent $1,000 to Shimon. Reuven comes to claim his debt. Shimon says, I owe you nothing. Witnesses come along and say, you owe 500. So what did Rabbi Chia say? So obviously, Shimon has to pay the first 500. And then again, Rabbi Chia suggests that Shimon has to take a shvuah on the remaining 500. And I will say, and by the way, that's how the Rambam paskins. That is the halacha ma'aseh the Rambam paskins. Now, Rabbi Chia said, because again, testimony, or I should say, hoda'as piv, admission should be no greater than testimony. Now, I will say, so now we spent a significant amount of time trying to figure out what exactly is Rabbi Chia comparing it to. In other words, what are the comparisons? So is he comparing it ultimately again to Modeh B'Miktzas? Is he comparing it ultimately again to Eid Echad? What is he comparing it to? So then we spent a significant amount of time dealing with that particular issue as well. Fine. But we'll say, we also went ahead and spoke about the idea, just nuggets to take away. Nuggets, number one, that if you go ahead and somebody entrusted you with a pikadon, and you claim that you never had the pikadon, and it turns out that you're a liar, then you're a liar. And you've lost your credibility for Eidos. Yet, denial of a loan does not make you into a kafran, does not make you into a liar. Why not? Even though witnesses come along and say you do owe the money. Why? Because we assume that when people deny a loan, it's still their intention to pay it back. They're just trying to buy themselves time. Excellent. But we'll say the next piece we saw, what was the next piece we saw? Good. So I said the next piece we saw was the following. Again, and also I want to point out, all of this sugya is all Rabbi Chia, right? It's all still in Rabbi Chia. So we'll say the next, then, like appendage of the Rabbi Chia discussion we spoke about was Halech. That in a case where, say all the same cases, Reuven says to Shimon, I lent you $1,000. Shimon says, you only lent me 500, the Halech. We're just going with Rashi's interpretation of Halech. What does Halech mean? I agree you lent me 500. I never even touched the 500. Here it is in its extant form, and leave me alone. I don't know anything else. So both say, so now, the shaila is, what is Halech? Is Halech Modeh B'Miktzas or not? Machlokes Rabbi Chia and Rav Sheshas. Rabbi Chia treats Halech as Modeh B'Miktzas. Rav Shesha says that Halech is not Modeh B'Miktzas. They will say, then the Gemara went ahead and brought in another case. What was the other case? Sla'im dinarin. Reuven lent Shimon money, and it says in the document, Reuven lent Shimon sla'im. What happens? Reuven comes along to collect the debt. Reuven says, you owe me 5 sla'im. Shimon says, I only owe you 3. What's that case? Machlokes from Shimon Elazar and Rabbi Akiva. Shimon Elazar says, Modeh B'Miktzas. Rabbi Akiva says, are you out of your mind? That's not Modeh B'Miktzas, that's Meshiv Aveda. Because since at the end of the day, all the document could obligate the borrower to is 2, because it doesn't have an amount in it, any additional amounts ultimately is Meshiv Aveda. The Gemara then on Amud Beis spent the rest of the time trying to read in the respective positions of Rabbi Chia and Rav Sheshes of Halech into that Gemara. We left, so both sides, so that's kind of where we left off with this. We'll pick up a Be'ez Hashem tomorrow with this Sun Sugya. And again, I just want to point out, all of this is still Rabbi Chia. Again, this is all in the same case of Rabbi Chia on Gimel Amud Aleph. I'll say, Be'ez Hashem tomorrow, I promise you closure. I promise, not on all your life problems, but I will say, but at least on Rabbi Chia, on Gimel Amud Aleph, I will say, what a journey, what an adventure. I know that it's a lot. If you have not yet claimed your Daf Yomi notebook and pen and pencil, I will say, please take it. Write down the nuggets, write down the notes, write down the yisodos. Say shkayach. Chevron, have a great day. Wait, how are you?
just handle it? I mean, you say, here it is. Does it mean it's, I'm here physically, there's the